Bible.
In the year 1844, a woman walked into a government office in Canton, China, and surrendered. She was not dragged there in chains. She was not captured by the British Royal Navy, which had spent years trying to hunt her down. She was not betrayed by one of her own men. She walked in of her own free will, dressed in fine silk, flanked by her most trusted lieutenants, and she sat down across from the representatives of the Qing Empire and demanded terms, and they gave them to her. Every single one. A full pardon, no prison, no execution, no punishment of any kind. She kept her fortune. She kept her ships. She kept her honor. She retired to a life of comfort, opened a gambling house, raised her children, and died an old woman, peacefully, in her own bed. Her name was Ching Shih, and at the height of her power, she commanded the largest pirate fleet in human history, 80,000 men and women, sworn to her absolute authority, over 1,000 ships, a floating empire that controlled the entire South China Sea, crushing the navies of China, Portugal, and Britain. She was more powerful than Blackbeard, more successful than Captain Kidd, more ruthless than Calico Jack. She was, quite simply, the greatest pirate who ever lived. And here is the thing that will drive you crazy. You have probably never heard her name. Because history, the history we are taught in American schools, is obsessed with a very specific kind of pirate, the Caribbean pirate. The golden age of piracy that lasted maybe 30 years and produced a handful of famous names before the British Navy wiped them out. That story, the story of the Jolly Roger and buried treasure in wooden legs, has been told 1,000 times. But the real story of piracy, the story of an empire built on the water, of a woman who rose from the lowest depths of society to command a force that terrified emperors and humiliated the greatest navies on earth, that story has been buried, until now. Today, we are telling that story. The story of Ching Shih, the pirate queen. She was not born Ching Shih. The name we know her by is a title. Ching Shih simply means wife of Ching. Before she was the pirate queen, before she was the terror of the South China Sea, she was a woman with no name that history cared to record. We know her birth name was Xian, or possibly Shi Xiango. She was born in 1775, in the poor, crowded, desperate province of Guangdong, on the southern coast of China. Her family were Tanka people, the boat people, the despised ethnic minority who lived their entire lives on the water, forbidden from living on land, forbidden from marrying land people, treated as less than human by proper Chinese society. The Tanka were the lowest of the low, and within that world of poverty, Xiang was born a girl. In 18th century China, to be born a girl to a poor family was to be born with a price tag already attached to your life. She was almost certainly sold into prostitution while she was still a child. The exact details of her early life are lost, swallowed by the same historical silence that erases the lives of most women who are not queens or saints, but we know enough to piece together the picture. She worked in a floating brothel, one of the flower boats that dotted the Pearl River Delta, serving the sailors, the fishermen, the pirates who came and went from the port of Canton. This was not the romanticized world of the courtesan. This was brutal, exhausting, degrading labor. Women in her position rarely lived past 30. They died of disease, of violence, of despair. This should have been her story. A short, brutal life, an unmarked grave, an oblivion. But Xian had something that set her apart. We do not know exactly what it was. Intelligence, charisma, a ferocious will to survive, or perhaps just luck, the random, inexplicable luck that separates the forgotten dead from the legends. Whatever it was, it caught the attention of a man who would change her life forever. His name was Ching Yat, or Cheng Ai, and he was one of the most powerful pirates in the South China Sea. He came from a long line of pirates, a dynasty of sea wolves who had preyed on shipping for generations. He commanded a fleet of several hundred ships, and in 1801, he saw Xiang on one of the flower boats, and he decided he wanted her, not as a temporary companion, not as a one-night transaction. He wanted her as his wife. The story goes that Xiang, when approached by the great pirate chief, did not simper or cower. She negotiated. She demanded that she be not just his wife, but his full partner. She would have a share of his treasure. She would have authority over his men. She would be more than a trophy. She would be a co-commander. Ching Yat, perhaps amused, perhaps genuinely impressed, and perhaps just deeply in love, agreed. They were married, and Xiang became Ching Shih, the wife of Ching. And her education in piracy began. N018-0. Part 3: The Education of a Pirate Queen. Ching Shih did not simply marry into a life of crime. She threw herself into it with a ferocity and intelligence that shocked even the hardened pirates who surrounded her. She learned everything. She learned navigation, the art of reading the stars and the currents in the treacherous shoals of the South China Sea. She learned naval combat, the tactics of ramming, boarding, and encirclement that allowed a smaller, faster ship to bring down a heavily armed merchant vessel. She learned the economics of piracy, the systems of supply, the fencing of stolen goods, the complex web of bribes and protection money that kept the pirate fleets operating in the shadow of the Qing Empire. But most importantly, she learned leadership. Ching Shih was a warrior. He was brave, charismatic, and feared, but he was not an organizer. The pirate world of the South China Sea was a chaos of competing fleets, each loyal to its own captain, each fighting the others almost as often as they fought the government. Ching Shih saw this chaos, and she saw the opportunity in it. If the pirates could be united, if they could be forged into a single force, they would be unstoppable. In 1805, Ching Shih and Ching Shih began to work towards this unification. They forged an alliance of the 6 largest pirate fleets operating in the region. It was a delicate, dangerous piece of diplomacy. Pirate captains were not known for their willingness to share power. Egos were enormous. Old grudges ran deep. But through a combination of Ching Shi's reputation and Ching Shih's sharp intelligence and political acumen, the coalition held. They created the Red Flag Fleet, named for the crimson banners their ships flew, and they drew up a code of laws, a pirate constitution, that would govern the behavior of every man and woman under their command. This code, the Code of Ching Shih, is one of the most remarkable documents in the history of organized crime. It was brutal, it was absolute, and it was brilliant. The code decreed that any pirate giving his own orders or disobeying those of a superior would be beheaded on the spot. Anyone stealing from the common treasury of the fleet would be beheaded. Anyone who deserted their post or ran from battle would be beheaded. Anyone who raped a female captive would be beheaded. Let me pause on that one. A pirate code that made rape a capital offense. In the early 19th century, this was not morality. This was military discipline of the highest order. Ching Shih understood that if her men were allowed to abuse captives, the fleet would descend into a chaotic rabble, incapable of coordinated action. She also understood that female captives were a valuable commodity. Ugly or old women were to be returned to shore unharmed. Attractive young women could be taken as wives by the pirates, but only with the captain's permission. And if a pirate took a wife, he was forbidden from mistreating her. If he was unfaithful, he was executed. Let me say that again. Cheating on your wife was punishable by death in the Red Flag Fleet. Ching Shih was building not just a pirate crew. She was building a society on the water, a floating civilization with its own laws, its own economy, its own brutal form of order. And at the center of it all, the power couple that held it together. Ching Shih, the warrior, Ching Shih, the lawgiver. But in 1807, disaster struck. Ching Shih, the great pirate chief, was caught in a sudden, violent typhoon off the coast of Vietnam. His ship was lost. He was killed. Ching Shih was a widow. And by every law of the pirate world, by every law of the world she lived in, she should have been finished. A woman, alone, in command of a coalition of the most violent and ambitious men in Asia. Every pirate captain in the fleet looked at the situation and saw an opportunity. They could seize power. They could break the coalition apart. They could take what they wanted. But they did not understand who they were dealing with. The moment Ching Shi's death was confirmed, Ching Shih moved. She did not wait for the captains to come to her. She summoned them. She did not ask for their loyalty. She demanded it. She did not present herself as a grieving widow in need of protection. She presented herself as the rightful heir to her husband's command, the keeper of the code, the voice of order in a world of chaos. The captains were stunned. Some were angered. Some were intrigued. Some were openly hostile, muttering that they would never take orders from a woman, from a former prostitute, from a creature of the flower boats. Ching Shih listened to their objections with cold, flat eyes, and then she presented them with her new co-commander. She had not chosen a man to replace her husband as a figurehead. She had chosen a young fisherman named Chan Pao, the adopted son of her late husband, a man she had known since he was a boy. He was fierce, loyal, and utterly devoted to her. The two of them would rule together. And to ensure that there was no question about who was really in charge, Ching Shih made it clear that all major decisions would require her personal approval. Chan Pao would lead the fleet in battle. Ching Shih would lead the fleet in everything else. Finance, logistics, discipline, diplomacy, the law. The captains grumbled, and then Ching Shih made her move. She had identified the most hostile, the most ambitious, the most dangerous of the captains who opposed her. She gave them a simple choice: accept her authority, or leave the fleet with their ships and their men. No hard feelings, no pursuit. Some of them, perhaps unwilling to test the unknown quantity that was Ching Shih's new regime, took the offer and sailed away. They were never seen again. The ones who stayed fell in line. The message was clear. Ching Shih was not asking, she was telling. And she had the will, the intelligence, and the ruthlessness to back up her words. The red flag fleet was now hers. Under her command, the pirate coalition did not weaken. It grew. It became a machine, a vast, coordinated military-industrial complex of crime. Ching Shih established a network of spies and informers that stretched from the palaces of Canton to the fishing villages of the coast. She had agents inside the King government. She had agents inside the Portuguese trading posts in Macau. She knew what the authorities were planning before the authorities themselves knew. She established supply chains that kept her ships provisioned with food, water, gunpowder, and weapons. She developed a system of protection money that operated like a shadow tax system. Villages along the coast paid her fleet for protection, and she provided it. If a village refused to pay, it was raided and burned. If a village paid, it was left alone, and its fishermen were protected from other pirates. This was not random banditry. This was statecraft. Ching Shih was running a parallel government, a pirate kingdom that operated alongside and in direct competition with the King Empire. And the King Empire, for all its ancient power and prestige, could do nothing to stop her. Let's talk about the code in more detail, because it is the key to understanding how Ching Shih controlled 80,000 outlaws. The code was not a suggestion. It was not a set of guidelines. It was law, absolute and unforgiving. Theft from the common treasure, as I said, was death. Desertion was death. Disobedience of a superior officer was death. The code also governed the distribution of loot. Every ship taken, every cargo seized, every village raided. The spoils were brought to a central location and divided according to a strict formula. 20% of everything went to the fleet treasury, the common fund that paid for ships, weapons, supplies, and the support of the families of dead pirates. The remaining 80% was divided among the crew, with specific shares for the captain, the officers, and the common sailors. This was a pension system, best social safety net. Centuries before any legitimate government was doing such things, a pirate who lost a limb in battle received a permanent pension from the fleet. The families of pirates killed in action were supported by the fleet. Ching Shih understood something that many rulers never learn. Loyalty cannot be bought with fear alone. Fear keeps people from rebelling, but it does not make them fight for you. To make men fight, you must give them something to fight for: a share of the wealth, a sense of belonging, a promise of security. The code provided all three. But the code was not just about rewards, it was also about punishment, and the punishments were terrifying. A pirate caught withholding loot for himself was flogged and beheaded. A pirate who deserted was tracked down, his ears cut off, and then he was paraded through the fleet and chained before being executed. A pirate who raped a captive was beheaded on the spot, his body thrown overboard without ceremony. A pirate who cheated on his wife was executed. And the wives, yes, there were wives in the pirate fleet. Many of the pirates were married to women who lived on the ships, who fought alongside the men, who managed the supplies and cared for the wounded and sometimes took up a sword themselves. Ching Shih's fleet was not just a gang of men. It was a community, a floating society of families, bound together by the iron rules of the code. The code even extended to the treatment of captives from enemy ships. Ordinary captives, fishermen, and small-time traders were usually released unharmed after being questioned for intelligence. Wealthy captives were held for ransom, treated well during their captivity, and released once payment was made. But enemy sailors, the men of the King Navy or the European ships who fought against the fleet, were not treated so gently. They were often executed. Sometimes they were tortured for information. The Red Flag Fleet was not a humanitarian organization. It was a pirate empire, and it was at war. The result of this discipline was a fighting force unlike anything the world had ever seen. The King Navy, corrupt, poorly led, and manned by conscripts who had no desire to die for the emperor, was useless against the pirates. The British Royal Navy, the most powerful naval force on the planet, was humiliated again and again. British warships, with their heavy cannons and disciplined crews, were designed to fight other warships in pitched battle. But the pirates did not fight pitched battles. They swarmed. They used small, fast ships called lurches, armed with light cannons and crewed by men who had spent their entire lives on the water. They would surround a larger ship, overwhelm its defenses, and board it before its crew could organize a defense. They used fire ships, old vessels packed with oil and gunpowder, set ablaze and sent drifting into enemy formations. They used the geography of the South China Sea, the thousands of islands and hidden coves and treacherous reefs, to ambush their enemies and then vanish into the mist. The great powers of the day, the Qing Empire, the Portuguese, the British, they all believed that they were the masters of the world. Ching Shih proved them wrong. Let me tell you about some of the battles, because when you hear the scale of Ching Shih's operations, you will understand why the emperors and admirals of the world were terrified of a woman from the floating brothels. In 1809, the Qing government, desperate and humiliated, decided to crush the pirates once and for all. They assembled a massive fleet, over 100 warships, thousands of sailors and marines. They allied with the Portuguese, who contributed 6 warships of their own, heavily armed and crewed by experienced European sailors. This was the largest naval operation China had seen in decades. The combined fleet sailed out to find Ching Shih's forces and destroy them. Ching Shih did not run. She did not hide. She met them head-on in the Battle of the Tiger's Mouth. At the entrance to the Pearl River, she sent Chang Pao, her young co-commander, to lead the battle. The pirates had fewer heavy ships, but they had numbers, they had speed, and they had a tactical genius that their enemies could not match. The battle raged for days. Ships exploded. Men burned alive. The sea was thick with wreckage and bodies, and when the smoke cleared, the Qing and Portuguese fleet was shattered. 6 Portuguese warships were lost. Dozens of Qing vessels were sunk or captured. The survivors limped back to port, and the Qing admirals had to report to the emperor that they had failed again. The emperor was enraged. He fired his admirals. He hired new ones. He offered massive bounties for the heads of the pirate leaders. He started to understand that he could not win this war with military force alone. The pirates were too strong, too well organized, too deeply embedded in the coastal economy. The Qing government was fighting a shadow, so the emperor tried a new tactic, the amnesty offer. In 1810, the Qing government announced that any pirate who surrendered would be granted a full pardon. It would be given land, money, and a chance to start a new life. Many of the smaller pirate captains, tired of the endless war, took the deal. The coalition that Ching Shih had held together with such difficulty began to crack. One of her most powerful subordinates, a captain named Qiu Po Tai, defected to the government with his entire fleet. Ching Shih was facing a crisis. If the defections continued, her fleet would be whittled away until she was left alone, exposed, and doomed. But Ching Shih was not a woman who panicked. She was a woman who calculated, and she made a calculation that would change everything. Ching Shih looked at the situation with the cold, clear eyes of a strategist. She had built an empire on the water. She had defied the Qing Empire, the Portuguese, and the British. She had commanded a fleet of 1,000 ships, but she was not a romantic. She was not interested in a glorious last stand. She was interested in winning, and she understood that the definition of winning was not necessarily dying in battle. It was getting what you wanted and living to enjoy it. So, in 1810, she made a decision. She would negotiate her own surrender, but on her own terms. She sent word to the Qing authorities. She was willing to discuss an end to hostility. The government, exhausted and desperate, was willing to listen. What followed was one of the most extraordinary negotiations in the history of warfare. Ching Shih walked into the negotiations not as a supplicant, not as a criminal begging for mercy, but as the leader of a sovereign power treating with an equal. She demanded a full pardon for herself and Chang Pao. She demanded that her pirates be allowed to keep their personal wealth. She demanded that those who wished to retire be given land and a small pension. She demanded that those who wished to continue serving at sea be absorbed into the Qing Navy as official sailors, with rank and pay. She demanded that she and Chang Pao be allowed to keep a personal fleet of vessels, to be used for legal trade. And she got it all. The Qing government, faced with the choice between continuing a disastrous war they could not win and giving a pirate queen a comfortable retirement, chose the latter. The woman who had once sold herself to survive now dictated terms to the Emperor of China. It was the most successful exit in the history of crime. Ching Shih surrendered her fleet. The Red Flag Fleet was disbanded. Its ships burned or absorbed into the Navy. Thousands of pirates took the amnesty, settled on land, became farmers, fishermen, merchants. Chang Pao was given a rank in the Qing Navy, a respectable position with a steady salary, and Ching Shih retired. She had spent less than a decade as the active commander of the pirate fleet. In that time, she had built an empire, fought off the greatest navies on earth, and then walked away with her fortune and her life intact. No other pirate in history, male or female, can can claim such a complete and total victory. What happened to Ching Shih after her surrender is a quieter story, but no less remarkable. She and Chang Pao settled down. They had a son, Chang Pao. The young warrior who had stood by her side through the battles and the betrayals, died in 1822, only 12 years after the surrender. He was still a young man, and the cause of his death is not known for certain. Some say illness, some say an accident, some whisper that he was murdered, perhaps by agents of the government who wanted to tie up loose ends, or perhaps by enemies from the old days who had never forgiven his role in the pirate empire. We will never know. Ching Shih did not remarry. She did not fade into obscurity. She used her considerable wealth to open a gambling house in Macau, the Portuguese trading colony on the coast. It was a shrewd choice. Gambling was legal, profitable, and perfectly suited to a woman of her skill. She understood risk. She understood human nature. She understood how to run a business where the house always won. The gambling house thrived. She raised her son, who would grow up to become a minor official in the king bureaucracy, a respectable career for the child of a pirate queen. She grew old. The woman who had survived the brothels, the typhoons, the naval battles, the political intrigues, lived to see her hair turn white and her grandchildren play at her feet. In 1844, at the age of 69, Ching Shih died peacefully in her own bed. She was buried with honors, surrounded by her family. The pirate queen of the South China Sea had done what no Caribbean pirate ever managed. She won. Completely, totally, and finally. Her legacy is complicated. To the Qing government, she was a threat that had to be neutralized, a symbol of disorder and rebellion. To the people of the coast, she was something more ambiguous, a protector, a tyrant, a source of income and a source of fear. In the folklore of the region, stories of the pirate queen persisted for generations. Some say she was a witch who could control the winds. Some say she was a demon who drank the blood of her enemy. Some say she was a hero who stood up to the corrupt officials and the foreign devils and proved that even the lowest of the low could rise to rule the world. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. She was not a witch. She was not a demon. She was not a saint. She was a human being, operating in a brutal and unforgiving world, who made choices that allowed her to survive and thrive when everyone around her expected her to die. She was a master of violence. She ordered the deaths of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of people. Her fleet raided, burned, and killed. She was not a role model in any simple sense. She was a force of nature. So why, if she was so extraordinary, have so few people in the West ever heard of her? Why do we teach our children about Blackbeard and Captain Kidd, who commanded tiny fleets and died within a few years of their rise to power, and ignore the woman who ruled the largest pirate fleet in history for nearly a decade and then retired peacefully? The answer is complicated, but it tells us a lot about how history is written. First, there is the simple fact of geography and language. American history education is profoundly Eurocentric. The pirates we learn about are the ones who operated in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in the waters that were directly relevant to the colonial history of the United States. Blackbeard blockaded Charleston. Jean Lafitte fought at the Battle of New Orleans. These are stories that are woven into the fabric of American identity. The South China Sea, for most of American history, might as well have been on another planet. The sources are in Chinese, Portuguese, and Vietnamese, not English. The scholars who studied them publish in academic journals that most people never read, but there is a deeper reason. Ching Shih does not fit the narrative. The story we tell ourselves about pirates is a story about freedom, about rebellion, about sticking it to the man, but it is also a story about men. The pirate world, as we imagine it, is a world of hyper-masculine adventure, a boy's fantasy of swords and treasure and living outside the law. A woman in that world is a disruption. She forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What if the greatest pirate was not a man? What if the most successful criminal enterprise in maritime history was run by a woman who was once a prostitute? This does not fit the Disney version. It does not fit the action movie version. So she is ignored. She is erased. She is relegated to the footnotes while the men take center stage. But the third reason is perhaps the most important of all. Ching Shih's story does not end the way we expect a pirate story to end. We love the tragic arc, the rise and fall, the brief, brilliant flame that burns out in violence and death. Blackbeard died in battle, his body riddled with bullets and sword cuts, his head hung from the bowsprit of a British ship. Captain Kidd was captured, tried, and hanged. His body left to rot in an iron cage over the Thames as a warning to others. Calico Jack was captured drunk and hanged, and the famous female pirates Anne Bommy and Mary Read, who sailed with him, Both died young and forgotten in prison. These are the stories we tell. The pirate who pays for his crimes. The brief, violent life. The inevitable fall. Ching Shih does not give us that story. She gives us something much more unsettling. She got away with it. She walked into that government office, demanded her terms, and received them. She kept her money. She lived her life. She died in bed. Where's the justice in that? Where's the satisfying narrative arc? There is something almost offensive about her story. It suggests that the world does not always punish the wicked. It suggests that sometimes, the bad guys win. It suggests that a woman from the lowest depths of society can build an empire of blood and sail off into the sunset while the navies of the world gnash their teeth in frustration. This is not a comfortable story. It is a true story. And that is why it has been buried. What can we learn from Ching Shih? What can her life, 200 years ago, on the other side of the world, teach us today? I think there are several things. The first is about power, real power, the kind of power that shapes the world and bends other people to your will. Ching Shih understood something that most people never learn. Power is not about force. It is about systems. She did not rule 80,000 pirates because she was the strongest fighter. She probably never swung a sword in battle. She ruled because she built systems. The code of laws, the system of loot distribution, the intelligence network, the protection rackets. These were the bones of her empire. The muscle was the ships and the cannons and the warriors, but the bones were what held it all together. When she walked into that negotiation with the King government, she was not relying on her personal charisma. She was relying on the fact that she controlled a system that the government could not defeat. That is real power, the power of the system builder. The second lesson is about leadership. Ching Shih led people who had no reason to follow her. The pirates of the Red Flag Fleet were the hardest, most violent, most independent-minded men in Asia. They were not inclined to take orders from anyone, let alone a woman, but they followed her. Why? Because she was fair. Because she was consistent. Because she made sure that the rules applied to everyone, including herself. The code was brutal, but it was also clear. Every pirate knew exactly what was expected of him and exactly what would happen if he failed. There was no favoritism, no corruption at the top. The captain who withheld loot was executed just as surely as the common sailor. This kind of integrity, in a world of betrayal and chaos, was magnetic. Men who had spent their lives being cheated and exploited by their superiors found themselves serving a leader who kept her word. That is a powerful thing. The third lesson is about reinvention. Ching Shih was born into a world that gave her no options. She was a poor girl from a despised ethnic minority, sold into prostitution, destined for an early and unmarked grave. She reinvented herself, first as the wife of a pirate chief, then as the commander of a fleet, then as the negotiator who secured her own peaceful retirement, then as a legitimate businesswoman, a respected member of the community, a mother and grandmother. Each reinvention required her to learn new skills, to adapt to new circumstances, to shed her old identity and take on a new one. This is not easy. Most people are trapped by the circumstances of their birth. They are told, implicitly or explicitly, that this is who you are, this is what you can be, and you cannot rise above it. Ching Shih refused to accept any of that. She refused to be defined by her past. She refused to be limited by the expectations of others. She made herself into what she needed to be, over and over again. In the fourth lesson, the darkest one, is about the nature of the world. Ching Shih's story is a reminder that the line between legitimate authority and criminal enterprise is thinner than we like to think. She ran a protection racket. The government runs taxes. She used violence to enforce her will. The government uses violence to enforce its will. She built a fleet to control trade routes. The government builds navies to control trade routes. The difference between Ching Shih and the King Emperor was not one of morality. It was one of legitimacy. And legitimacy is a story we tell ourselves. It is a collective agreement about who gets to call themselves the law, and who gets called an outlaw. Ching Shih was an outlaw because she lost a battle for legitimacy. But she did not lose the battle for survival. She did not lose the battle for wealth. She did not lose the battle for power. She simply existed outside the story that the powerful told about themselves, and she proved that you can live a long, prosperous, and successful life outside that story, if you are smart enough, ruthless enough, and brave enough. Today, the South China Sea is still a contested space. The great powers, China, the United States, and the nations of Southeast Asia, jockey for control of the shipping lanes, the fishing grounds, the oil reserves beneath the seabed. The waters that Ching Shih once ruled are now patrolled by modern warships, aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, but the ghost of the pirate queen is still there. If you know where to look. In the coastal villages of Guangdong, the old people still tell stories of the woman who commanded the winds and the waves. In the gambling houses of Macau, where fortunes are won and lost every night, the spirit of the woman who ran the most successful gambling operation in the city's history lingers. In the records of the Qing dynasty, carefully preserved in the archives of Beijing, the official reports of the pirate wars, the desperate memos from provincial governors begging the emperor for more ships and more men, the final, humiliating document that records the terms of Ching Shih's surrender. All of it is there, a paper trail of an impossible life. And in the world of popular culture, Ching Shih is finally, slowly, beginning to get her due. She appears as a character in video games, in graphic novels, in the background of movies that never quite center her story. A big-budget Hollywood film about her life has been rumored for years, stuck in development hell, perhaps because no one can quite figure out how to turn a story about a woman who wins into a satisfying blockbuster. But the interest is there. The curiosity is growing. People are starting to ask the question that this video is answering. Who is the greatest pirate in history? And the answer, more and more, is a woman whose name you have never heard. A woman who commanded 80,000 outlaws. A woman who built an empire on the water and then walked away with her fortune and her life. A woman who proved that the most powerful force in the world is not an age, it is not a government. It is a single human being with the intelligence to see the world clearly, the ruthlessness to act on what she sees, and the will to never, ever surrender. Ching Shih, the Pirate Queen. Remember her name. Let me leave you with this. The next time you hear a story about pirate, the next time you see the skull and crossbones on a flag or bottle of rum or Halloween costume, I want you to think about what that image really means. It does not just mean adventure. It does not just mean rebellion. It means a choice to live outside the law, a choice to take what the world will not give you, a choice to build your own kingdom when the kingdoms of the world reject you. Most of the people who make that choice end up dead. That is the truth. The pirate's life is short and brutal and usually ends at the end of a rope, but not always. Sometimes, the person who makes that choice is smarter than everyone else. Sometimes, they are tougher than everyone else. Sometimes, they look at the empires and the navies and the emperors and the laws, and they say, I will not bow. I will not break. I will win. And then they do. Ching Shih won. She won against the Qing Empire. She won against the Portuguese. She won against the British. She won against every single person who told her that a poor girl from a floating brothel could never amount to anything. She proved them all wrong. And that, I think, is why her story matters. It is not because she was a good person. She was not. It is not because she was a hero. She was not. It is because she was impossible. And she made the impossible real. In a world that told her she was nothing, she became everything. In a world that told her she would die young and forgotten, she lived long and built a legend. In a world that told her that power belonged to men, she took it for herself. That is Ching Shih. That is the Pirate Queen. And now you know her name. Thank you for watching. If you made it to the end of this journey, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think of Ching Shih. Tell me if you believe, as I do, that she was the greatest pirate who ever lived. Share this video with someone who needs to hear her story. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss the next deep dive into the forgotten corners of history. I will see you in the next one. Until then, remember the coat, remember the flea, remember the Pirate Queen.